This is me, Blake Newman. I'm a front-end engineer at Attest and a Vue.js core team member, as some of you may know. My Twitter handle is available there, and that's my GitHub as well, if you ever want to follow me and listen to what I say. I talk loads of nonsense most of the time. So Attest, we're actually starting to use Vue.js to build our platform. So I'm going to give you a quick demo to show you what Vue can power. Hopefully this works. Nope. There we go. So what the test is it's a platform to create surveys which we target 80 million customers or consumers over 80 countries that clients will then go and target them so they can get real-time feedback about their brand and track their brand, etc. So if I search for demo, there was one, this one. Right, so as you can see, this is the results page from taking a survey. Everything you've seen from now on, there is no requests happening. So after consumers have taken the survey, so here we've got 1,000. Let's point it. Yeah, there you go. So we've got 1,000 responses. So we have 24 questions in this survey, I think. So if you work out the maths, you've got 1,000 users, times that by 24, times that by possible answers that they could have given. Then you've got multiple choice kind of questions, etc. And then the maths just goes huge. And we've also got the whole demographics of those users. So if I now click on an answer, you'll see that this reacts in real time on the client. So this is using complex math algorithms, but everything that happens. So if I click on here, you'll see that the answers is adjusting. So all of this is happening client-side. There is no requests in the back end. So all of this maths happens through Vue.js and some complex work that took a lot of time. We've just released this in Vue.js before it wasn't, and we've just improved the speed by moving to Vue.js because it just allowed us to concentrate on the important things. So that's enough of a demo. So what's actually on the agenda today in my talk? It's we've got the background of Vue.js, inbuilt features of Vue.js, looking at how reactivity systems work, templates and are they bad, and the future of Vue's internals. So a bit of a background. This is the boring part of the talk that everyone's going to go, oh yeah, I know that, whatever. So where did it come from? The birth name of it was actually called Seed when Evan New invented it. He started the public release in July 2013, so it has been on the market for quite a while now. Of course, Evan New, you can follow him on Twitter there. And we have over 25 core team members now. And that's from 12 different languages, multiple countries. We have 65 repos and plugins now, so the ecosystem of the core is growing rapidly, but it's constantly changing. We add more plugins to cater for more use cases. Backers, so Vue.js is a financial open source solution where we ask for you to give back to the community. So now we have over 350 backers, so there is support for Vue, and always, if you use something at all, it's always nice to give back. So what does that equate to? At the moment, we've got over 18,000 monthly, which most of that goes to Evan, and then we get, if we do some work, we can request some money. Plus, there's much more alternative streams for the core team to go and make some money off Vue and get a financially stable system for themselves. And as I said, it's a financially viable open source system, or software. So we have over 163 stars in the organization. There's the users. Oh, you can see the actual stats there. Of course, that doesn't mean everything. Like, people can star stuff and they can get bot star and stuff, but it just shows that in the whole of our organization, there is a huge interest. it's the third most starred organization on GitHub. So you're talking about companies that have done loads of open source work, and yet we're still on top as one JavaScript tool. And that means the core itself is the 6th most starred repository. So it just goes to show that how far Vue has come in the recent years. So what is Vue? It's the progressive JavaScript framework. What do I mean by that? So the idea, as I wait for this to load, is that we want to have declarative rendering. We want to be able to render our content to the users in a declarative way as much as possible. So how that comes out is that you've got the core, so that's the component system. And then if you wanted to go further, you would then go and add Vue router, which is for your routing, and this is part of the core repositories, so you know it's always going to be up to date and in sync, rather than having to guess what tool I should use. Then the same for Vuex, which is then for your state management, so as your application grows, you can then go and use this tool to go and expand the horizons of how you can manage your state. And then you go into the build system, so you progressively can start with like a CDN URL and then work your way into Webpack, for example, and learn how to go and create a proper build system with Vue Loader, and then you can use Vue CLI as well. And a new Vue CLI that's being created just allows you to keep on upgrading through their plugin system. And then, of course, you've got the ecosystem. So there's stuff in the core that surrounds it, like I can't think of anything on the top of my head. But this enables like SSR, native, and then further extensions on how to build your application. And it's not only core stuff, but there is a huge ecosystem out there now of components to help you go and do stuff, like Vue YouTube, for example. So let's look at how it could be like jQuery-ish. It's not, of course, it's not like jQuery, but we would start perhaps with a body. And we would have some content that we want to render, and then we'd have a div with an ID app where we're going to put stuff into. We can add a CDN URL, which would just bring Vue in with the runtime, so you don't have any compile steps. Then you have new Vue. Vue at this point would be on the window like you would use with jQuery, and then we might attach to the app with you have the EL, and then attach the app, and then we want to maybe put some data with the message hello Vue, and then we'd have our message there. So you can really simply just start hacking away, prototyping, and then build upon from there. You don't have to go full Webpack build tools straight away. If you're still a junior developer, for example, you can learn on the fly. From then on, you get all of this stuff. Functional components, dynamic components, preprocessors, Ava, Jest, caching, hot reloading, asynchronous components, critical CSS, single file components, CSS modules, TypeScript, scope slots, template engine, reactivity, streaming, JSX, SSR, PWA, slots, beautiful documentation, which it is great, transition effects, Vue router, render functions, provide and inject, Vuex, scope CSS, virtual DOM, weeks, and if you want to use Nux.js, which is similar to Next.js. And this just comes from, you start off with that, and you can just progressively add stuff in. So let's look at how we do that. So the single file component is one of the core features of Vue. And for those who don't know what it is, it's a template. So you declare your template as above. Then you have your script. And then you can have some style, for example. And you can have custom blocks that allows you to do custom things like write some documentation in line of one component. So you can, it's like you're separating your concerns still, but you're also keeping the concerns together. But that doesn't mean you can't use JSX and not have the template, but you can still have your styles in line, and you're writing more natural CSS, and it's more declarative. From then, you can pre-process everything. So you can add template pre-processing, then you can add TypeScript, for example, and you can have stylus or any other post-CSS, etc. You can choose what you like, essentially. Whatever your build step is, you can pick it. And Vue Loader with Webpack handles all this out of the box. So scope CSS is a feature of Vue as well. And how we actually do scope CSS is we just add the scope to your style attribute, or your style element. And then what happens there is then, when it goes and renders out, you're going to have something that looks like this. It adds a data attribute, and then all of your styles are scoped. They're locked into that component, so you can never break your CSS, so it can't cascade in. You can use other alternatives as well, like BEM, for example, or ITCSS, or whatever the next greatest CSS framework out there is. But there's simple ways to achieve these goals. You can also use CSS modules. Similarly, you just add module. So if anyone's used CSS modules in React, it can get really confusing and hard to go and work with. And then what that does is it creates an output like that. It looks ugly, but it's another way that you can lock in your dependencies or your styles. So also out of the box, when you use a Vue single file component, is hot module reloading, which is great. So let's look at what that is. Some people might not know. So you don't really have a Vue. So when you have your Vue, you have a compiler. You've got to compile down your code somehow. So what happens? You compile. Then you might have a bundle server, which you have to have if you're using HTML. And then that bundle will create a bundle. And then the hot module reloading runtime will generate some code. And then that's how your Vue is represented. It will go and build it up. But what happens if we want to change? We don't want to reload the whole page. So we make a change, goes to compiler, and then there's a hot module reloading server, which will then create its own patch bundle. So it just create a small amount of JavaScript to patch up that component, for example. And then goes to the runtime, and it will work out how it's going to do it. So for Vue, we want to keep all the states. It goes and collects the states and make sure it doesn't replace it. And then you hit create code bundle, and then it'll patch the Vue. So what that looks like is like this. You start adding H4, for example, in your template, and then you save, it's updated. It's not refresh the page, it's just updating. And it works for JavaScript, for example. So you just edit that, and then you see the date has changed, and then same for your CSS. So all of your state remains, so you don't have to, it's really quick to reload. And you can continue development really quickly. So let's look at actually Vue.js, Vue internals, and work out how Reactivity works and how other frameworks compare. Right, so we have this example. So this isn't Vue, this is just an abstraction of, we'll have a class child, which renders in JSX, that would if you've got the enabled attribute, then it will print the message, and if it's not, it will say, I'm disabled. Then you have the parent, which renders two of these child components, and they've got different ways of displaying. So the first child component is, the message is this.message, and to be enabled, it has to have content. And then the second one, it's the flag this.enabled. So when we go and instantiate it, that's right at the bottom. What happens if we go and change the data property, vm.message? We want to work out how the reactivity will go and re-render the page. So with React and Angular and other tools, it's a pull reactivity system. And what I mean by that is that, say there's a change on the tree here, it will then say, oh, all of these components need to re-render. But you're doing a lot of work here. You don't want to re-render all of those components because it could be just one of those nodes at the bottom. It's the tree. You don't want the full tree. So how do we solve that with React? We would do should component update, and then we'd maybe put it on that block of our tree. And then if it's not, it shouldn't re-render, which you have to manually give hints to React, it will then not render that tree. So what is the pull system? It's the explicit pull signal from a developer. You've changed something. You've gone and updated that property, and you have to do manual optimization hints from the developer. You can simplify this, for example, with immutable data. So if we go and look at how that tree would work, I don't know if you can see the little dot. Yeah. So if we was to go and put vm.message, and this is in a pull system, we would then have this dot message update and this dot message update here. And it would basically works off the props. So if the props have changed, then it's going to do a re-render if you don't specify to be the component not to update or to update. And then the same for this one. So both of these elements are going to re-render. But that's not great. We have to then go and write more code just to be able to have an optimized application. So how does Vue work with this? It's a push reactivity system. So say a change happens, like you've gone and changed something, it will go down a tree and say, push down signals to say, I need to update. Then it will keep on going down the tree. This component needs to update. And then this component and that component need to update. So it goes and pushes down the tree and works out behind the scenes on what needs to change, and it will create the most efficient way to go and do your re-render. And for Vue, it's essentially, think about it as we automatically implement the should component update function from React. So these elements will then re-render. So what the push is, well, some benefits and negatives of it. It does have a memory overhead because we need to go and track all of the properties, and it's proportional to the data set size. So what that means is that the larger your data set, the longer it is going to take to start up. But you can do manual optimization hints such as using immutability to go and get that performance out, because then it won't track changes. It also benefits because it gives you asynchronous and batched updates, and it improved by skipping. You can improve it by skipping the observation of immutable data, and you improved by reducing computation granularity. So, for example, a component, you can split that apart into multiple components, so then it will go and work down a tree of what needs to update. So, in Vue, let's go and look at actually what happens behind the scenes. So you have a component render function that creates your virtual DOM tree. And then when it goes into the render, if you go and touch a property in that data object, which for us it's this dot message, it goes and creates a getter, and that getter will then go to a watcher and be collected as a dependency. So now it knows that, hey, when I've used this render function, I have used, is it still working? Yeah. It has used, it knows that if there's an update to this, it possibly needs to go and re-render. And then each time you set it, it will again notify that watcher, and in turn, that watcher will go and trigger a re-render if something has changed and it's been used. So if we look at the example again and work out what would happen when we change vm.message, we're in Vue, because in the render function, as we saw in the previous demonstration, is that if it's used, it's going to trigger an update because it knows about what has been used. So this .enabled this .message for this component here isn't used. Yes, so this .message at this point, what am I doing? Okay, so this one will re-render because enabled is set to nothing. So at this point it's false, and that means it's changed here. So then this .message will then, it creates a new path of dependency changes. So if we was to look at this example, this .message and this .enabled, this is false. So at this point of render, this .enabled, it never gets this point. So it knows under the hood that, hey, my tree doesn't need to re-render, so that bottom one won't re-render. So let's go over the differences. You've got an explicit pull signal from the developer with a pull-based system. So in React, you have to signal that. And then you have manual optimization hints that you have to go and do with should component update, etc. But you can simplify it with immutable data sets. However, with Vue, you have the push. One of the negatives is the memory overhead, proportional to the data size. You do get asynchronous and batched updates. But you can improve it again by using skipping observation of immutable data and reducing the computation granularity. So frameworks, let's compare what they do. Again, there's no silver bullet. Every framework does it on its own reason and why you use it, so you need to go and do your research before you go and use the framework. to go and work out what your use case is and maybe React or Vue would be a better choice for you, or Angular 5. Angular 5 works with on-push, so to change it to a push system, you need to then specify it on push. You've still got that manual intervention you need to do. With React, to get into a pull system, you can use MobX. I've never used MobX with React, but I've heard that some people really enjoy it. Or you can use Vue.2 and immutable data to get the reverse, where you have to explicitly trigger a change on the tree. So that's the reactivity system. Let's look at how templates and render functions work with JSX. So let's look at the representation from a Vue side of things. So you have your template, and you might have a p tag with a message. And then that in JSX essentially would look like this. So there's not too much difference. It's just syntax changes. But the difference with JSX is you get the power of JavaScript. And as I said before, you can use JSX with Vue. And then if you were to use the template, or JSX, this is what it would compile down to under the hood. So essentially, if you've seen React, you will see React.create component. In Vue, it's the same thing, create element. And then under the hood, it goes and does all this compilation optimization with little helpers to actually make your code more efficient. So if we actually look at what a virtual DOM node is, it's a representation of what it's going to do when it does a render cycle. So you have your class, for example, and then to have some classes, whether it's enabled and disabled that class. You'd have your style attributes, so that's what it would render into the style attribute, and then you'd have some attributes, etc. So it's just a representation of what it needs to do at render time. And that's what that create element does. So it just creates an object, a representation of what it needs to do at runtime. So the power of templates is that we get to have normalization and some advanced things that you can't do with JSX because it's so dynamic. So normalization is basically that you have arrays and arrays, and essentially it's just flat, and it's gonna, you know this is a flat tree, so we can actually go and optimize at compile time that template and work out how to flatten that tree behind the scenes so it doesn't need to do nested work. So if I remember, okay, cool. So with React, you would have, for example, this items.map, and then you can see that with React that it's actually got a for loop in there under the hood. But what we really know is that all that's going to do is just create an array of p elements, and this means that it's going to have to do extra work at runtime. With Vue, if we use a template system, we would actually get some performance enhancements because it now it compiles down at runtime. So if you actually look here, you can see that this huge pile of mess, what it creates as the output, is doing some optimizations for you. It knows at this point that what the structure should be and what the depth is, so it can go and normalize that ahead of time. And that's that number 2 there. So we also get static nodes, so templates. When you use templates, you get some static node hoisting, which means that, for example, this render function, we know that the static content, this is all static, but with React, it can't, when you create it in JSX, it can't go and optimize the path or know that not to do this work. But when you go and use your template, it will then go and hoist all of this static content out. So you'll only go and do that render cycle and create those vnodes once because it knows what is static. And that gives us a huge performance win when you're using templates. Further optimizations are always happening within Vue. So it's really cool that templates system actually gives you better, it's declarative. So JSX and templates shouldn't be compared to as, oh, I don't like templates, I don't like JSX. They're both good for their own reasons. Like JSX gives you this imperative and really way to control how your application works, whereas templates give you optimizations that you can do with JSX or tools can't give you out of the box. So if we actually compare the differences between JSX and templates, because there's always that question when you go as a developer. JSX, you get the power of JavaScript. It is declarative with JSX. No DSL, so no dynamic syntax language. People say, oh, you don't need to go and learn anything with JSX. Of course you do. You need to go and look out how you create these JSX elements. So it's a bit of a fib when there isn't a DSL. It's closer to compiler, that is true. And that actually means that you've got the power to go and create your elements as you like. Templates, on the other hand, they're HTML and you've got a small amount of DSL to go and learn. It's more than JSX, but it's very declarative. You go and look at that, you go and understand what that template's doing very simply. And actually, when you go and look at a template versus JSX, you've got actually much less lines of code. It's declarative. You get child normalization, and you get static node hoisting. You get progressive code updates as well. So, as I said before, when you go and create Vue, you can do it in the Vue way with a CDN, or you can then go and use the tools. So you can progressively take that HTML from your previous site and then pump that in and progressively update that to work with Vue. JSX is logical, and templates can be used as presentational. So in a test, we actually use both JSX and templates. Templates and JSX can work together really well. So if I quickly look at the future of Vue internals, so in 2.6, we'll have some various updates and improvements, such as error handling, functional components, and SSR. They're all going to be updated with some improvements. And also the possible support for native map and set types to be supported by the Reactivity. At the moment, they're not supported natively from Vue, but there is possibility that that's coming in 2.6. Also, we've this very exciting Vue.js 2.x next. It will be targeting evergreen browsers only. This is to leverage native ES6 2015 features, means we have less compilation down, so it actually creates a smaller script size. This will be run in parallel to all of the other branches. That's why it's called 2.x next. So if you want to use it for the future and you don't have to support old browsers, you can use this branch to go and, or release to go and keep up to date. So what it actually means is that we're going to rewrite the reactivity system with proxies, which will give us various improvements. So that can be that, so proxies might actually help us with the setup time, reduce memory overhead when we're using the pull system of reactivity. And also, it's going to help reduce the code size massively, and it also gets rid of all of the current caveats that we have when you get change detection with arrays, for example. So what are proxies? The proxy object is used to define custom behavior for fundamental operations, e.g. property lookup, assignment, enumeration, and function identification. So we can actually go and detect everything that's happening here. So currently, Vue.js has some caveats, such as an array length change detection and the new property addition and delete property detection. But proxies allow us to detect all of these type of mutations, and there'll be no more issues. So we're really looking forward to moving to proxies. We're also looking to move the core of Vue to TypeScript. That doesn't mean as an end user you have to use TypeScript. It just means that the internal system, when we move to TypeScript, we would actually get some improved code readability because everything be typed, so it helps our contributors. It gives us stricter typing, and it ensures that our code is monomorphic as possible, which is, monomorphism is basically ways that to ensure that your functions aren't overloaded within JavaScript so the VM can better optimize your code. And it helps us to produce better TypeScript support as standard for anyone that's interested to use TypeScript with Vue. That's the end of my talk. Q&A. I'm sorry, I'm very ill at the moment, as you might be able to hear on my throat, so I've kind of rushed through it. But if you could give me some feedback on what I could do to improve, just go to this URL. It takes you 2 minutes to fill in the survey. And then you can get the slides, which I have got all of the notes with it, so you can actually go and read up what more details and what I was talking about. Of course, you can follow me here and on GitHub.
Thank you. Okay, so we have some questions from all you lovely people here and Front End Reunited. If you have any more, just throw them in and we'll see if we can get them in quickly. So, let's come out this way a bit. So I'm not sure how to ask the first question without like putting bias into it, so I'll have to spell it. Or the framework that you just were talking about, how do you pronounce it?
If you're Spanish, it's Vue.
Oh, really?
If you're French, it's Vue. But we like to say Vue, as in proper hard V sound.
Good to know, good to know. So if you had to build a new app with Vue right now, like we locked you in a room and said, build this, then what would be the top 3 things that you would really miss? Oh, without Vue, sorry.
Okay, cool. That's a good question, actually. I guess it's what happens when you don't have a framework. I'm going to say I'm not using React or Angular as well. I guess it's just vanilla JavaScript, right? The top 3 things would be just a declarative way of using HTML to create your components, and a single file component system. That just makes looking at your components really easy. The reactivity system, it's really helpful just to get work done, and you can focus your tasks on other things, like complex computation, for example. And Vuex. I love Vuex. It's just simple state management system, and that's what I'd really miss.
Yeah. How many people here have tried building something that renders into the browser without something like Vue? Just stick your hands up. How painful was it? Yeah, lots of groans. All right, so how does Vue check if a component should render or not? Nice techie question for you there.
So as I was saying, the reactivity it creates a tree of V nodes, and at that point it will go and create a patch cycle to go and detect what needs to go and re-render to the DOM. So in a pull system, or with Vue, it goes down the tree until it notices that it's caused a set. So it's tracking all of those dependencies, and if a dependency's been hit, then that child and its children will go and re-render, but only at that point.
Okay. So this question sounds like it's come from someone who's had a horrific time diving into another code base. How do you know when you've gone too far splitting up your code into child components?
It's a good question. Generally, when you don't reuse that component and you're just creating it for the sake of it, then you can keep that hoisted out. And it actually gives you some performance benefits sometimes as well, that at least components, the less setup time there is. So just think smartly, just create components when you need to create them, and if your file, for example, gets to 2,000 lines long, then you should look at that file and go, actually, can I reduce that down? But for example, if you've got a page, that page component is going to be quite big. It's going to have lots of logic of how to render the components, but you can probably split that out into smaller chunks, but that's where you need to go and look at is your component reused, and is this component too big to understand?
I know with some other frameworks, they sometimes recommend even taking your lowest level, like HTML elements, and converting them into components. So is that just for sort of consistency's sake, but is that something you would avoid?
No, because that kind of element will be used quite a lot. Such as a heading element, you always go and create a heading component and natively render how it is, because you want to abstract how you've used it to match a style guide, for example. So yeah, very low level elements, then yeah, such as date pickers and stuff like that, all of those kind of components, they get reused across the application. So yeah, definitely I'd do that.
Cool. Ooh, contentious. Why would I choose Vue over something like React?
That's a question you have to ask yourself. It's when you could go and compare them. Go and actually use both of them and work out what you like the most. Some people prefer React, obviously, and I still use React at a test. We have it for admin system. So maybe it's just a choice of, maybe I want to go and use it to keep my horizon open, to understand this tool. So if you've got multiple people in your team, you've got the opportunity to go and learn more as a team, and rather than just keeping yourself locked into a framework, you go and learn another framework. So if you go for another job somewhere, or you need to go and create a quick project, maybe you go, or the requirements say this, you would actually go and probably decide which one. But you know, because you've used both, which one would be best suited for that application.
What was it about the Vue framework or the community that made you want to stay around?
So I just started contributing and helping out, playing around with issues and helping other people out, and the response I got back was just overwhelmingly good, and it's just growing so fast that it was a good place to go to at the time, and it was the community helped a lot to get the feature set we wanted. So actually Vue is built by the community. Like every feature that's there was pretty much asked by the community and sometimes even built by the community. So it's just one of those open source projects that encompasses everyone.
Lovely. So Vue seems really popular in the Laravel community, the PHP framework, for those who don't know it. Why, and are there any other communities who are getting into Vue and throwing all their chips in on that?
There are big companies using it, such as IBM, using Vue internally on quite a few projects. I can't really disclose much more on that because it's internal projects to them. There are other tooling systems out there that are also doing it, like Alibaba. They've invested a heavy amount into their React Native solution for Vue called Weeks. There are other communities starting to look at Vue as well. So every day I get a question from other communities like, why would you use this over React, etc. So it's just expanding across the web. It's a good solution. And I don't know if every company's going to end up using Vue one day, but it could also be that no one uses Vue or React in 5 years. So you have to take everything with a pinch of salt, that if a community is using it, it can get outdated very quickly.
Yeah. So someone submitted another question that sort of leads out that quite nicely, and it's, should we build any site in Vue.js, even small sites like local bakeries?
If you were to create a simple site, there are tools out there that allow you to do static site generation with Vue. So maybe you already use Vue quite a lot, but you don't want to have to load JavaScript onto the page. You just want to render something static. We just actually released something called VuePress, which is a static site generator for Vue. It lets you make simple sites really quickly, and then you can just add Vue.js to add those little bits of, or just pure JavaScript to add that little bit more functionality.
I guess that's what you're comfortable with as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you can make a bakery site quicker in Vue.
Yeah, because with Vue you can just load it onto the page as well, so you can use it like jQuery, which is, it empowers you to go and add slowly if you want to. So you can just write simple HTML files and load them and then start using Vue for a CDN.
I look forward to you opening a bakery with your sparkly Vue.js site. Is the Vue community working on pre-compile optimizations like Preact in the React world?
Yes, we've done that work already, and a lot of the Preact world at the moment is doing exactly those benefits. At the moment, trying to work out how to get benefits with JSX, like static requesting, etc. And it's not really technically feasible because with JSX you have loads of branches that you just can't understand or optimize for. But it doesn't mean it can't be done. It just requires a lot of work and understanding of how to do it. So once stuff happens in the Preact world for JSX, for example, we can also do the same and learn from how they've done stuff and pre-compile options for our JSX solution.
Cool. And then a final question. How is the Vue.js job market doing?
Good. I've got a job. That's a start. But again, it's like maybe you would find a job that's advertising for Vue.js, and if you've been working with Vue.js even a little bit, you've got that better background to go into that interview. And even if you've got React experience only, you still got those similar concepts that will allow you to go and use Vue.js if you want to. You don't have to force yourself to use Vue.js all the time. You just learn the tool.
Okay, thank you. Any closing remarks?
I'm going back to sleep.
Going back to sleep? All right, well, let's give Blake a round of applause and hope he enjoys his nap.